I don't know how to explain what happened that night in the hospital, but sometimes, when I think about it, I can still feel the cold air on the back of my neck. It was supposed to be a simple overnight stay, nothing serious. The doctors just wanted to keep me for observation after I fainted at work. I remember telling them I felt fine, but they insisted, and honestly, I was too tired to argue. They put me in a small room at the end of the hallway, the kind of room they use when every other one is full. The lights flickered almost constantly, giving everything this weak, yellow glow. The air smelled like antiseptic, but underneath that, there was something else. Something metallic, like old rust or dried blood. I figured it was just my nerves. Around midnight, the hallway outside went completely silent. No nurses walking back and forth, no carts squeaking, no machines beeping from other rooms, just silence. The type that makes your chest feel tight. I tried to sleep, but every time I got close, I swore I heard something. Soft footsteps, not running, not hurried, slow, barely dragging across the linoleum floor. I held my breath and listened. The steps would start far down the hall, then stop, then start again, a little closer. I told myself it was a nurse doing late rounds, but there was something wrong about the rhythm. Too slow, too uneven, like someone was relearning how to walk. The lights in my room flickered again, but this time they dimmed almost completely before coming back up. My heart started pounding, and I felt this pressure behind my eyes, like my body knew something wasn't right before my mind did. Then came the breathing, just outside my door, slow and shaky, like whoever was out there was struggling to breathe at all. I could see the shadow under the door, 2 feet, motionless, facing my room. I didn't move. I didn't say anything. I just watched that shadow stay perfectly still while the breathing grew louder and wetter, like each inhale was scraping through something broken. When the footsteps finally continued past my room, I thought I was safe, but I hadn't realized something. The shadow hadn't moved with them. I stared at the bottom of the door, waiting for the shadow to shift, but it stayed completely still, even though the footsteps were fading farther down the hallway. My breathing got shallow, and I could feel my pulse pounding in my neck. I kept telling myself it had to be the lights or a trick of my eyes, but deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. After a few minutes, the hallway went silent again. No footsteps, no breathing, nothing. The shadow was gone. I finally forced myself to relax, letting out this shaky breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I tried to convince myself it was just exhaustion or maybe the weird side effects of fainting earlier. But then something happened that I still can't explain. My room door clicked, not fully opening. Just the soft sound of the latch shifting, like someone gently pressed on it from the outside. I froze. The handle didn't turn, but I watched it twitch, just a tiny movement, like someone was testing it, checking if I had locked it. I hadn't. The handle lowered slowly, so slowly it barely made a sound. I felt sweat sting my forehead as I stared at it. There was no reason for anyone to come into my room at that hour. I wanted to reach out and hold the handle in place, but I couldn't move. I felt like my whole body was glued to the bed. Then the handle stopped halfway, and it stayed there. Not down, not up, just suspended like that, as if the person holding it paused mid-motion. That was somehow worse. After what felt like a full minute, the handle eased back into place. A quiet click. Then everything went still again. I tried to move my legs, but they wouldn't respond. My chest felt tight, and each breath came out shorter. I grabbed the call button on instinct and pressed it over and over. The tiny red light blinked as if it was sending a signal, but no one came. When I pressed my ear toward the wall, trying to hear anything outside, I caught something faint. Not footsteps this time. Whispering. Soft, fast, like someone repeating the same thing over and over, but too low for me to understand. It was coming from the hallway. No, it was coming from right outside my door. The whispering got clearer, not louder, just sharper, like whoever or whatever was out there had moved closer. I held my breath, hoping the sound would stop, but it didn't. It sounded like a voice trying to speak through a mouth that didn't fully work. Wet, uneven, words slipping together like they were being dragged through water. I pulled my blanket up to my chest and pressed myself against the bed rail. My heartbeat was so loud, I swore it was echoing off the walls. I kept staring at the gap under the door, terrified I'd see a shadow again. But nothing moved. The whispering kept going, steady, almost patient, like it knew I wasn't going anywhere. Then it changed. A single, drawn-out breath pushed under the door, cold enough that I actually felt it against my toes. I yanked my feet back instantly. That cold wasn't normal. The room temperature hadn't changed. It was just that one breath, like someone kneeling directly on the other side of the door. Something tapped the door next, just once. A soft knuckle tap, too deliberate to be anything else. Then another, then 3 in a row, slower each time. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Every part of me was locked in place. After the last tap, the whispering stopped, completely. The silence felt heavier than the noise. That was when the lights flickered, not the room lights, the hallway ones. Their glow seeped under the door in quick, weak pulses. Each flicker made the gap under the door go dark for a fraction of a second. The last flicker stayed off longer than the others, as if the lights had died. In that darkness, I heard a soft scrape, like something dragging across the floor. When the lights finally came back on, the scrape stopped, and the whispering returned, but farther away this time, moving down the hall. I listened until it faded completely. A nurse eventually came in about 20 minutes later, acting like nothing was wrong. I asked if she had heard any knocking or voices, but she just shook her head and said the entire floor had been quiet all night. Before leaving, she paused at the door and frowned. She ran her fingers over a small spot near the handle. A fresh scratch, thin, straight, too high for a wheelchair or cart to make. She asked me if I did it. I told her no. But I didn't tell her the truth. I didn't tell her something was trying to get in. And some nights, I still hear that whispering when I'm alone. I don't know how to explain this without sounding crazy, but something happened during my hospital stay that still keeps me up at night. It wasn't dramatic or loud or anything like that. It was the quiet moments that scared me the most, the kinds of things you only notice when everything else has gone still. I was admitted for a simple observation after a fainting episode. Nothing serious, at least that's what they told me. They put me in a small room at the end of a long hallway on the 4th floor. I remember thinking the place felt too empty, like the air was stretched thin. Even the fluorescent lights hummed in this soft, tired way. That first night, I couldn't sleep. My chest felt tight, and I kept hearing footsteps outside my door. Slow, heavy ones. They didn't sound like the nurses' steps. Nurses walk quickly, confidently. These steps were hesitant, dragging a little, like someone wasn't sure where they were supposed to go. Every time they reached my room, they stopped. Just stopped. No knock, no movement, just silence. I kept telling myself it was the building settling or maybe a late-night patient walking around. But around 2 in the morning, the light outside my door flickered, just once. A quick, weak pulse. Then I heard something else. Breathing. Very faint, like someone was standing inches from the door. It had this shaky rhythm, almost wet, like the person was struggling to breathe through something thick. My own breathing started to speed up. I pressed myself against the bed, trying to make as little noise as possible. My heartbeat was loud enough that I could feel it throbbing in my ears. I kept staring at the thin strip of light under the door, terrified I'd see a shadow move across it. Then the breathing stopped as suddenly as it started, but the footsteps didn't. They turned around slowly, dragging again, and moved farther down the hallway until I couldn't hear them anymore. I barely slept after that. I kept telling myself it was nothing, just my nerves, just the echo of an old building. But the second night proved it wasn't. The second night was worse, mostly because I went into it already afraid. Every small sound felt sharper, like the hospital had suddenly grown ears and was listening to me. Even the beeping of the monitor beside me felt too loud, too irregular, like it was reacting to something I couldn't see. Around midnight, the hallway lights dimmed slightly, not enough to call it dark, but enough to make everything look washed out. I tried to distract myself by scrolling on my phone, but the connection kept dropping. Eventually, the screen froze completely, and that was when I heard it again. Footsteps. Only this time, they didn't approach from the hallway. They came from inside my room. I froze. Completely. The sound was soft, spaced apart, like bare feet on cold tile. I didn't see anything at first. The room looked exactly the same, but the air felt heavier, like something was standing between me and the door. My skin prickled all at once, and my throat tightened. I whispered a shaky hello, even though every part of me didn't want an answer. Of course, nothing responded. Not with words, anyway. Instead, something lightly tapped the metal railing of my bed. Just one tap. Gentle. Curious. The sound didn't match anything natural. It wasn't the clang of the bed shifting or the rattle of equipment. It was intentional, like a finger brushing metal. My heartbeat picked up so fast I felt dizzy. I reached for the call button, but before I pressed it, the corner of the room nearest the bathroom darkened, not like a shadow passing by. More like the light itself was being pulled away. The shape wasn't clear, but it was enough to make me feel like I was being watched. Then came the breathing again, closer, softer, like it was right beside my ear. I jerked away so fast I nearly pulled the IV out of my arm. The monitor next to me beeped in panic at my sudden movement. That sound must have snapped everything back to normal, because the darkness in the corner thinned and disappeared, and the footsteps stopped. A nurse rushed in immediately, asking if I was okay. I didn't know what to tell her. She looked around the room like she expected to see someone else there, but she didn't. And I didn't sleep at all after that. By the third night, I was exhausted in a way that didn't feel normal. It wasn't just lack of sleep. It felt like something had been draining me little by little. Even the nurse mentioned I looked pale, like I hadn't eaten in days, even though I'd been eating every meal they gave me. I kept telling myself I'd imagined everything. Stress, medication, the weird silence of a nearly empty hospital wing. It made sense. It was logical. But deep down, I knew I wasn't imagining it. The feeling of being watched hadn't stopped. It followed me the whole day, lingering just behind me like a cold spot. When night fell, the hospital seemed even quieter than before. The hall outside my room felt empty. Too empty, like every sound had been swallowed. I tried keeping the TV on for background noise, but the screen kept flickering to static for a second or two at a time. Every flicker made my chest tighten. Around 2 a.m., the temperature in the room dropped sharply. I could see my breath fog in front of me when I exhaled. The lights dimmed again, but this time they didn't come back to full brightness. My room seemed to sink into this bluish haze, and for a moment, I honestly thought I was passing out. Then I saw it. Not the full thing. Just a shape standing at the foot of my bed. Small, about the size of a child. Its outline was faint, like it was made of smoke, but its head was tilted too far to the side, like it was listening to something I couldn't hear. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My heartbeat thundered so hard it felt like my ribs might crack. The shape took one step toward me. The tile didn't make a sound under it. Not one, then another. Closer, slow, careful, almost gentle. When it reached the side of my bed, I finally found my voice. I whispered stop, just that one word, and the thing froze completely. But then it leaned forward, and even though it didn't have a face I could make out, I swear I felt its breath on my cheek. Cold, damp, too close. The monitor beside me screamed. My heart rate spiked off the charts. Nurses burst in seconds later, and just like the night before, the thing vanished the moment they opened the door. They told me it was a panic attack, a vivid hallucination from stress and medication. They said I never wasn't alone in the room, but last week, when I went back to get the rest of my records, I overheard 2 staff members whispering. They were talking about the pediatric wing, the one that shut down years ago, the one right beneath my room. I still don't know why the memory of that night feels louder than anything else in my life. It was supposed to be an ordinary shift in an ordinary hospital, the kind of place where the fluorescent lights buzz louder than the patients breathe. But something changed after midnight, and sometimes I swear I can still hear the echo of that moment when everything went wrong. I was covering the East Wing alone. It was the oldest part of the hospital, the one everyone joked about, because the floor tiles never stuck right, and the lights flickered even after maintenance checked them. I didn't mind the quiet usually, but that night, the quiet felt wrong, too heavy, too slow, like the whole hallway was holding its breath. I remember pushing my cart past room 214 when I heard it. Soft footsteps behind me. Not rushed, not dragging. Just a slow pattern. 1-2 pause. 1-2 pause. I thought it was one of the nurses coming to check vitals, so I turned around. No one was there. The hallway was empty. Just a long stretch of pale walls and shadows pooling at the corners. I tried to laugh it off, but something in my chest tightened. My heartbeat felt thick and uneven, like it was skipping just to get my attention. I kept walking, trying not to look at the reflective glass panels on the doors, because I was suddenly afraid of seeing something standing behind me. A few minutes later, I heard breathing, faint, right behind my left shoulder. I froze. The kind of freeze that doesn't feel like fear at first, more like your body deciding for you that moving isn't an option. The breathing stopped the moment I turned my head, but the air around me felt colder, like someone had just stepped away. I pushed my cart faster after that, telling myself it was exhaustion. Night shifts do strange things to your sense of reality, but when I reached the end of the hallway, the lights above room 219 flickered 3 times and went out completely. Just that room, just that door. And that was when I heard a whisper from inside. My name. Slow, familiar. My first instinct was to walk away. Every part of my body screamed that nothing good was waiting behind that door. But something about the way my name was whispered made my stomach drop. It didn't sound like a stranger. It sounded like someone who knew me. Someone who had been close enough once to say my name softly like that. I forced myself to take a slow breath, but it shook all the way out of me. The hallway felt colder the closer I got to room 219. My footsteps sounded too loud on the floor, like the building itself was listening. When I finally stood in front of the door, the small window on it was completely dark. Usually you could at least see the faint glow of monitors, but this time there was nothing, just pitch black. I lifted my hand to knock, hesitating halfway. My fingers felt numb. Before I could touch the door, something brushed the back of my hand. Light, quick, like fingertips. I jerked back so fast that the cartwheels squeaked against the floor, but no one was there. No one in the hall, no one near me. That was when a soft tapping started on the inside of the door. Slow, rhythmic, one tap, then another, then a pause, almost like the footsteps I heard earlier. I swallowed hard and pushed the door open just an inch, just enough to peek inside. The darkness was thick, like stepping into an unlit basement. My eyes struggled to adjust. I could barely make out the shape of the bed, the outlines of the equipment. Everything was still. Then I smelled it, the faint scent of antiseptic mixed with something metallic, something that reminded me of old blood drying on cold surfaces. I whispered hello, my voice barely holding together. No answer, just the room breathing around me. Or maybe that was just my heartbeat pounding so hard it echoed in my ears. I reached for the light switch. My hand trembled so badly I missed it the first time, but right when my fingers finally brushed it, a voice from deep inside the room whispered again. Not my name this time, just one word. Stay. I don't know why I didn't run. Maybe I should have. Maybe everything that happened next wouldn't haunt me the way it does now. But the moment that voice whispered, stay, the air felt heavier, pressing down on my shoulders, on my chest, like the room itself wanted me inside. I finally flipped the light switch. The bulb flickered weakly, humming like it was struggling to stay alive. The room glowed in a sickly yellow light, just enough for me to see that the bed was empty. Sheets perfectly tucked, monitors silent, no signs of a patient ever being there. But the smell of metal was stronger now, filling my throat like something old had been pulled from the ground and left open too long. I stepped inside, telling myself I only needed to check the equipment log and get out. The moment I crossed the threshold, the door clicked behind me. Not slammed, not pushed, just a soft click like someone gently closing it. I spun around so fast I stumbled. The tiny window on the door was fogged over from the inside, as if someone had been breathing against it. My heartbeat was so loud, I felt it in my fingertips. Then I heard it again, breathing. This time it wasn't behind me. It was everywhere, coming from the corners of the room, from under the bed, from the space above the ceiling tiles, slow and uneven like someone struggling to inhale. I backed up until I bumped into the bed frame. The metal felt freezing. When I looked down, I noticed something new, something I swear wasn't there a second earlier. A handprint on the sheet, dark, faint, smeared, like someone had grabbed the fabric with shaking fingers. My throat tightened. I whispered, "Who's here?" My voice cracked in the middle of it. The breathing stopped. For a moment, everything was silent, too silent. A heavy, empty silence that made my skin crawl. Then right beside my ear, someone whispered I never left. I lunged for the door, yanking it open without looking back. The hallway lights were all on again, bright, normal, as if nothing had happened. When I glanced into room 219, one last time, the sheets were untouched. No handprint, no smell, Nothing. Everyone told me the room has been empty for years. No patients assigned. No records. No reason for anyone to be inside. I know what I heard. I know what followed me home. And some nights when I'm lying in bed, unable to sleep, I hear that same breathing just behind my left shoulder, waiting for me to turn around. I'll never understand why that night still feels like it's happening in the back of my mind every time I close my eyes. It wasn't my first late shift at the hospital, and it definitely wasn't the quietest one, but something about that particular night felt wrong the moment I stepped into the north wing. It was colder than usual, like the air conditioning had been cranked up only on that side of the building. I remember rubbing my arms, even though I was wearing a long sleeve. The north wing was used for overflow patients, but lately it had been nearly empty. A few rooms were being renovated, so most of the lights flickered uncontrollably, buzzing like old insects trapped against glass. I hated walking through there alone. The sound of my shoes on the floor echoed too much, like someone was walking right behind me, even when I knew they weren't. I was checking the inventory cabinet near room 307 when the silence shifted. It's strange how you can feel a change before you hear it. The air suddenly felt heavier, like it was pressing against my skin. My heartbeat picked up even though nothing had happened yet. Then I heard faint footsteps at the far end of the hallway. Slow, uneven, almost dragging. I froze with the clipboard in my hand. No patients were assigned to that side tonight. No staff had any reason to be there. I waited for someone to turn the corner, but all I saw was the long stretch of dim lights flickering one by one, as if something was moving under them. My breathing turned shallow. I told myself it was just the power acting up again, but the footsteps grew louder, closer, and then they stopped completely. Right outside room 307, right behind the door I had left slightly open. The handle twitched, just once, just enough to make my stomach drop. I stepped back slowly, my hands shaking so hard the clipboard tapped against my leg. For a moment, everything went silent again, so quiet I could hear the faint buzz of the lights vibrating above me. Then something whispered my name through the crack of the door. Not loud, not aggressive, just soft, like someone who had been waiting a long time. I didn't answer the whisper. I couldn't. My throat felt tight, like if I opened my mouth even a little, everything inside me would collapse. I waited for the handle to move again, but it stayed still. The crack of the door looked darker than the rest of the hallway, as if the room behind it had swallowed all the light. I forced myself to take one step back, then another. Every sound felt too sharp, my heartbeat pounding in my ears, my own breath trembling like it didn't want to be heard. I kept my eyes fixed on the door, expecting it to swing open at any second. It didn't. Instead, the lights above me flickered. Once, twice. Then they steadied, but the buzzing grew louder, almost like static. For a moment, I thought I heard something inside the wall behind me. A slow scraping sound, like nails, dragging across metal. I turned around fast, but the hallway was empty, completely still. I decided to head toward the nurse's station. I figured if I could just reach another person, I'd calm down, tell myself it was just the lack of sleep messing with me. But with every step I took away from room 307, I could feel something behind me. Not footsteps this time, just presence. Heavy, slow, matching my pace as if it was following but not touching the ground. I didn't look back. I couldn't risk seeing whatever might be there. When I reached the corner, the pressure suddenly lifted from the air around me. It felt like taking a deep breath after being underwater too long. I finally dared to glance over my shoulder. The hallway I had just walked through was dimmer than before, lights flickering in a line from the far end all the way to room 307, and the door I had left cracked open was now completely shut. I told myself to keep moving, just get to the station. Report the power issue. Ignore everything else. But when I reached the desk, no one was there. The chair was pushed back like someone had stood up in a hurry. The computer screen was frozen mid-chart. A cup of coffee, still steaming slightly, sat on the counter. That was when I heard the intercom click on. A long hiss of static, then my name again. Only this time it came from every speaker in the hallway. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. Hearing my name through every speaker felt like the whole building had leaned in to breathe on my neck. The static dragged on, almost like someone was trying to speak, but couldn't push the words out clearly. My hands tightened around the edge of the counter, just to keep them from shaking. I managed to reach for the intercom button. I don't know why. Maybe I thought someone was pranking me. Maybe I was desperate to hear a normal voice. I pressed the button and whispered hello into it, barely audible. The static stopped instantly. The silence that followed was so sudden and so thick that my ears rang. Then something answered, not through the speakers now, from right behind me. "Why did you leave me?" I spun around, but no one was there. The hallway was empty, completely still. The coffee cup on the counter was no longer steaming. It sat dead cold against the surface. I backed away, my heartbeat thudding against my ribs like I was running even though my feet hadn't moved. I didn't know where to go, didn't know who else was even in the building at this point. I just needed to get away from that voice. I started toward the exit, walking fast but trying not to look like I was panicking, even though I absolutely was. But when I passed the north wing again, every door slowly clicked open one by one, softly, deliberately, as if something inside each room stepped out at the same time. I didn't look in. I kept my eyes forward. My breath was broken, shallow, like my body was trying to outrun itself. When I finally reached the double doors leading to the lobby, I pushed them open so hard they slammed against the wall. The lobby was dark, not dim, dark. All the lights were off, even though they were supposed to stay on overnight. At the center of the room, someone stood facing the far wall, perfectly still, shoulders slightly raised, like they were listening. I whispered hello before I could stop myself. Whoever it was turned their head just a little, not enough for me to see their face, just enough to let me know they heard me. Then the intercom crackled to life again behind me. "Do not follow it. It is not one of us." I turned back toward the lobby figure in the same second the doors closed on their own behind me. And the last thing I heard before the lights cut out completely was the sound of someone breathing right beside my ear. This happened a few years ago, and no matter how much time passes, I still can't explain it. I was working a short-term job as a night clerk at a small hospital on the outskirts of town. It wasn't a busy place. Most nights were so quiet you could hear the vending machine humming all the way down the hall. Honestly, I liked it that way. Fewer people meant fewer problems, but there was something about the west corridor I never liked. Even during the day, it felt colder than the rest of the building. The paint on the walls was older, the floors creaked more, and for some reason the lights flickered every time someone walked under them. People said it was just old wiring, but the way the flickering synced with footsteps always made me uncomfortable. On the night everything happened, the hospital felt emptier than usual. The kind of empty where every sound echoes too long, like it's searching for someone to answer back. I had just finished logging files when the overhead lights dimmed for a second. Not unusual, but enough to make my chest tighten a little. I decided to do a quick walk down the west corridor, mostly to make myself feel better. The second I stepped into that hallway, the temperature dropped sharply. My breath didn't fog, but it felt cold enough that it should have. The floorboards creaked under my shoes, long drawn-out groans that sounded almost like they were reacting to my weight. Halfway down the hall, I heard footsteps behind me, slow ones. I stopped walking. The footsteps stopped too. My heartbeat picked up so hard, it felt like it was shaking my ribs. I glanced back, but the hallway behind me was empty. Just pale lights and long shadows stretching along the walls. I told myself it was the old building settling, the kind of lie you give yourself so you don't run like an idiot. I kept walking, trying to ignore the feeling of someone standing close enough to touch the back of my neck. Then I heard it, a soft whisper, not a word, just breathing, right behind my left ear. I jerked forward so fast, I almost lost my balance. The breath on my ear had been real, warm, close, too close. I spun around, expecting to see someone standing there, maybe a patient wandering or a nurse playing a cruel joke. But the hallway was empty all the way to the double doors at the end. Nothing moved, nothing breathed, nothing felt alive. My own breathing came out shaky, uneven. I pressed a hand against my chest, trying to steady the pounding in my ribcage. I told myself to relax. That fear makes you imagine things, makes normal sounds feel unnatural. But the air didn't feel normal. It felt thick, like the hallway was slowly filling with something I couldn't see. I forced myself to keep walking. The lights above me flickered again the moment I stepped forward. One, then the next, a chain reaction. like something was moving along the ceiling right above my head. I quickened my pace. The flickering quickened with me. When I reached room 115, I stopped. The door was cracked open, just barely. A narrow sliver of darkness showed inside. I knew that room was supposed to be empty. Renovations were scheduled for next month. There shouldn't have been anyone inside, not at this hour. But I heard it, a faint creaking sound, like someone slowly getting out of a bed. My stomach dropped. Every instinct screamed to keep walking, but my curiosity held me in place long enough for the creaking to stop. The silence that followed was worse, heavy, anticipating, like the room was listening to me breathe. I whispered hello even though I didn't want an answer. My voice sounded too small in the cold air. For a moment, nothing happened. Then something inside the room shifted, a soft dragging sound. Fabric brushing against the floor. It moved closer to the door, one slow slide after another. I stepped back. My hands were trembling so hard I could feel my nails digging into my palms. The dragging stopped right behind the cracked door. Then the door began to open wider. Not fast, not like someone pushing it with their hand, more like someone was inching toward me in the dark, pressing against it with their whole body. I didn't wait for the door to open all the way. I turned and walked fast down the hallway, trying not to break into a full sprint. My footsteps echoed sharp and hurried, and for a second I thought I heard a second pair following, dragging along the floor. I didn't look back. I couldn't. My chest felt tight, like every breath scraped against my throat. When I reached the end of the corridor, I pushed through the double doors and almost collapsed against them. The second they closed, the lights above me steadied. The air warmed slightly. It was like the moment I left that hallway, the entire atmosphere reset to normal. But my body didn't. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. My heart beat uneven and loud. I headed straight to the reception desk, planning to call security or at least someone who could come check the West Wing with me. But when I reached the desk, the phone was off the hook, just lying there, dangling by the cord. I didn't remember anyone leaving it like that. I picked it up to place it back on the cradle. Before I could, I heard it, breathing, not through the receiver, behind me, slow, heavy, like someone standing inches from my back. I froze. My skin crawled, every hair on my arm standing up. I didn't turn around. I couldn't make myself. Instead, I kept my eyes on the reflection in the dark window across from the desk. At first, I saw only my own silhouette. Then, very slowly, another shape appeared behind me, not clear enough to see details. Just a blurry outline of someone standing a little too close. Shoulders slightly hunched, head tilted like they were studying me. I blinked, and the shape seemed to get closer in the reflection. My breath hitched. I spun around. No one was there. The hallway behind me was completely empty. I backed away, staring at the spot where the reflection had shown something standing. The hospital suddenly felt too quiet again, too still, as if it was waiting. I left my shift early that night. I didn't tell anyone what happened. I didn't think anyone would believe me. But here's the part that keeps me from sleeping sometimes. A few days later, I had to pass by the West Corridor again during daylight. Room 115. The same room with the cracked door had something new written on the dusty window. A single word: stay. I'll never forget the night I realized just how wrong a silent hospital can feel. People always think the scary part is the screaming, the chaos, the emergencies. But it's not. It's the quiet. The kind of quiet that settles in your bones and makes you feel like you're being watched by something that doesn't need to breathe. I was covering the overnight shift as a float nurse in a small regional hospital. The building was old, the kind where the hallways curve slightly because the foundation has sunk over decades. Whenever someone walked upstairs, the ceiling tiles would shiver like they were trying to shake something off. I used to joke about it until that night. It was around 2 a.m. when the south wing lights started flickering. That wing had been closed for months, renovations, they said, but the wiring there was ancient. I grabbed my flashlight and went to check it out, mostly because I didn't want maintenance to blame nursing again. The second I stepped into the south wing, the temperature changed. It wasn't a normal cold. It felt like walking into a room that had been sealed for years. My breath didn't fog, but the air tasted stale, almost metallic. The floor creaked under my shoes with every step, slow bending groans that echoed too long down the hall. I told myself to just keep moving, check the breaker box, get out. But halfway down the corridor, I heard footsteps, not mine. Soft, deliberate steps coming from behind me. I stopped walking. The footsteps stopped too. My heartbeat kicked into a faster rhythm, pounding like it was trying to warn me of something ahead of my thoughts. I slowly turned around, lifting the flashlight. The beam stretched into the empty hall. Nothing there. No shadows moving. No figure ducking out of sight. But I could hear breathing. Faint, uneven, coming from a room just 2 doors down. Room 3B, a room that should have been locked. A low creak came from inside, as if someone shifted their weight on the old bed frame. I should have walked away. I knew that even then, but I stepped toward the door anyway. My hand was shaking so badly that the flashlight beam trembled across the doorway, like it didn't want to land on anything solid. I told myself I'd just look inside, confirm the room was empty, then leave. Simple, routine. But every step I took toward room 3B felt heavier than the last, like the air was pushing against my chest. When I reached the door, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. The lock on the frame was scratched. Fresh scratches. Thin, sharp lines running downward, as if someone had dragged something metal along it again and again. I swallowed hard and nudged the door with my foot. It creaked open slow, too slow, like it had been waiting for someone to touch it. I lifted the flashlight, aiming it toward the bed. The mattress was there, the old metal rails, the curtains half drawn. Everything looked untouched, but the breathing didn't stop. It was coming from the far corner of the room, hidden behind the curtain. Deep, shaky inhales like someone struggling to pull air into lungs that didn't quite work right. My heartbeat thudded so violently I could hear it in my ears. I whispered hello even though my voice barely made it past my lips. The breathing stopped. The curtain swayed, just a little, like something had brushed past it. I took one step backward, then another, keeping the flashlight locked on the curtain. The air felt thick now, heavy with the smell of something old, something like dust mixed with antiseptic, and a faint, sour odor that reminded me of long-abandoned bedsheets. Then the curtain moved again, a slow ripple, not from wind. There was no wind in that sealed hallway. Something was standing behind it. I backed into the hallway, nearly tripping over my own feet. The door to room 3B creaked wider, as if pushed from inside. I didn't want to see what was behind that curtain. I didn't even want to breathe the same air as it. I turned to leave, but froze when I heard footsteps again. This time they weren't soft or distant. They were right behind me. I didn't dare turn around at first. The footsteps behind me were slow, deliberate, as if whoever or whatever was there wanted me to hear it. My breathing grew unsteady, shallow. Every exhale trembled. I felt a cold pressure at my back, the kind of feeling you get when someone stands too close in an elevator. Only this was worse, heavier, like the air itself had weight. I forced myself to turn only my head just enough to see the edge of the hallway behind me. No one was there, but the footsteps kept going. I felt them more than I heard them, the faint vibration on the old floorboards, moving around me in a slow circle. My pulse thumped so loudly, I was sure it would drown out whatever sound came next. I tried to steady my breathing, but every inhale felt thinner than the last, like the hallway was running out of air. That was when the lights in the corridor flickered. Once, twice. Then every bulb went dim, except the one above room 3B. That one glowed brighter, and the curtain inside the room suddenly collapsed inward, as if something heavy had stepped away from it. I backed up until my shoulder hit the opposite wall. My mouth had gone dry. The metallic taste lingered at the back of my tongue. I kept my eyes on the room, terrified that if I blinked, I'd see someone standing in the doorway. Instead, I heard a voice, not a whisper, a breathy, broken exhale shaping the faintest sound. "Don't leave me here." I froze. The voice came from the same corner of the room where the breathing had been, but this time, it wasn't struggling. It sounded almost pleading, familiar in a way I didn't want to recognize. A cold draft pushed along the hallway, brushing past my legs. The light above room 3B flickered again, and for a split second I saw something in the doorway. Not a figure, a shadow, wrongly shaped, bending at angles a person couldn't. I didn't wait to see more. I ran. I didn't look back, not once. Not even when I heard something following me, dragging along the floor, scraping against the walls as if the whole hallway were too narrow for it. I burst through the stairwell door and didn't stop until I reached the main lobby where the fluorescent lights buzzed warm and normal again. Everything looked exactly as it should. Clean, quiet, ordinary. But when I finally gathered myself enough to return to my station, I noticed something on my clipboard. A single fingerprint smeared across the top, cold to the touch, and still wet. I don't walk near the south wing anymore. And sometimes at night, when the building goes quiet, I swear I hear that same breathing right behind me again. I still don't understand what I saw that night, but every time I think about it, my chest tightens like something is trying to crawl its way back out of my memory. It happened when I was assigned to the old wing of the hospital, the part that was supposed to be empty while they renovated. I wasn't a nurse or anything important, just a night shift clerk helping with patient files. My job didn't require me to go into that wing at all, but the elevator malfunctioned and somehow brought me there instead of the main floor. The doors opened with this slow metallic groan, and the lights in the hallway flickered like they were struggling to stay alive. I stepped out only because the elevator refused to close again. The floor felt colder than the rest of the building, like the air hadn't been touched by anyone for years. At first, I tried to call security, but my phone kept failing to connect. No signal, even though I'd used it just fine moments before. I heard footsteps behind me, slow, dragging steps. I thought maybe someone from maintenance was working late, so I called out. My voice echoed through the hallway, but no one answered. The footsteps stopped, like whoever it was had frozen in place. My heart was beating so hard it shook my chest, and I could hear my own breathing bouncing off the walls. I turned around and saw the end of the hallway swallowed in darkness. No shapes, no movement, just that heavy silence that presses against your ears. When I tried to step back toward the elevator, the lights behind me went out one by one. Each click echoed like a clock counting down. The last thing I noticed before I forced myself to move was a faint whisper, not a voice I could understand, but more like someone standing inches from my ear, breathing words they didn't want me to hear. I wanted to run, but my legs felt heavy, like the cold air was clinging to them. The only light left was the one above me, buzzing quietly. I kept telling myself it was just an electrical issue, maybe a broken sensor, maybe an empty hallway playing tricks on me. But the whispering didn't stop. It moved with me, sometimes behind my shoulder, sometimes near my ankle, sometimes so close it brushed against my neck. I forced myself to walk toward the staircase at the far end. Each step felt louder than it should have, like the hallway was amplifying everything I did. My breathing grew fast and shaky, and the whispering faded in and out, like it was circling me. At one point, I swear I felt fingers graze my back, just barely, the way someone might tap you to get your attention. I spun around so fast I almost slipped, but again, there was nothing, just the dark swallowing everything behind me. Halfway down the hall, I saw a room with the door slightly open. A thin strip of light leaked out from inside, warm and steady, nothing like the flickering lights above me. My first thought was relief. Maybe someone was there. Maybe a doctor was doing inventory or a guard was checking the place. But when I got closer, the light inside the room dimmed, like something stepped in front of it. I froze. The whispering went silent all at once. The sudden quiet was even worse. It felt intentional, like it was waiting. I pushed the door gently, just enough to peek inside. The room was empty. No equipment, no bed, no chairs. Completely cleared out. The light came from a single lamp on the floor, unplugged, as if someone had placed it there just to lure me in. Then I heard it again. The dragging footsteps, except this time they weren't behind me. They were inside the room, moving toward me even though I couldn't see anyone. My throat tightened so hard I couldn't breathe for a second. I stumbled back into the hallway as the door slowly started to close on its own. I didn't wait to see what was closing that door. I turned and hurried down the hall, almost tripping over myself as I headed toward the emergency exit sign glowing weakly in the distance. My heartbeat was so loud, it drowned out my footsteps, but not enough to cover the sound that followed me. It wasn't whispering anymore. It was breathing. Slow, heavy, steady breaths that didn't belong to me. Every time I sped up, the breathing grew louder, closer, like it was leaning over my shoulder. I kept my eyes straight ahead. I was too scared to look back. The hallway seemed longer than before, stretching endlessly, the walls narrowing around me. The air felt thicker, colder, like I was moving through something that didn't want me to leave. When I finally reached the exit door, I slammed my hand against the push bar. It didn't budge. I hit it again, harder, but it was like the door was locked from the outside. My palms were sweating, slipping against the metal. The breathing behind me grew rougher, almost impatient. I felt warmth on the back of my neck, like someone's mouth was hovering right over my skin. I whispered please without even thinking. I didn't know who I was talking to or what I wanted it to do. I just needed the door to open. Then, as if the hospital itself was listening, the lock clicked. I pushed the door open so fast it banged against the wall. Cool night air hit my face, and I stumbled out into the dimly lit parking lot. For the first time, I dared to look back. The hallway was empty, completely still, not a sound. The door slowly swung shut behind me. I stood there for a long time, trying to convince myself I'd imagined everything. That the dark hallways, the whispers, the heavy breathing, the footsteps were all just exhaustion messing with my senses. But as I finally turned to leave, I noticed the glass on the door. My reflection stared back at me, and right behind my reflection, right at my shoulder, was the faint shape of someone standing there. Too tall, too thin, completely still. When I blinked, it was gone. But every time I walk past a dim hallway now, I swear I still hear that breathing. I didn't realize how long I'd been holding my breath until I stepped into the hallway that night. It's strange, but sometimes I think the hospital was holding its breath with me. Everything felt unnaturally still, like the entire building was waiting for something. This happened a few years ago, and even now, I can't explain any of it, no matter how many times I try to make sense of it. I was covering the night shift for a coworker, something I rarely agreed to do. The ward was quiet, too quiet, and the lights flickered just enough to make me feel like I wasn't alone. Every footstep I took echoed down the hall, bouncing off the walls in a way that didn't sound right. It was as if there were more footsteps than mine, a softer second pair that always seemed half a beat behind me. At first, I shrugged it off. Old buildings make weird sounds. Hospitals are full of drafts, loose vents, shifting pipes. I told myself all of that as I checked rooms and charted vitals. But the uneasiness clung to me, the type that gets under your skin and sits heavy in your chest. I started noticing little things, curtains moving even when the windows were shut, the soft creak of a chair shifting in an empty room, a low hum of what sounded like someone whispering down the hall. Not words, just a sound that felt too close, too deliberate. My breathing grew shallow without me realizing it. I kept glancing over my shoulder, even though I knew no one else was scheduled to be on that floor. Every time I turned around, the hallway looked darker than it had a second ago, like the shadows were deepening bit by bit. It wasn't until I reached room 407 that I felt something was seriously wrong. The door was slightly open, even though I knew I had closed it earlier. A thin strip of darkness leaked out from the room like it was heavier than the light outside. My hand froze on the doorframe. I listened. At first, nothing. Then a slow, steady sound of breathing came from the other side. Not mine. Not any patients. Someone was in there. I don't know why I whispered hello. Maybe I hoped it would be a patient who wandered back from the restroom. Maybe I needed to hear my own voice to feel like I was still in control. But the moment the word left my mouth, the breathing stopped. Completely. Like whoever was inside had been caught listening. I pushed the door open just a little, enough to look in without stepping inside. The room was dark except for the faint glow of the monitor beside the bed. The screen was on, but the bed was empty. Sheets perfectly smooth. No indent where a body might have been. I stepped inside anyway, one slow step at a time, my shoes barely making a sound. The air felt colder in that room, damp and heavy like a basement. My heartbeat thudded so loudly, it felt like it was echoing off the walls. I checked the bathroom. Empty. I checked behind the curtain. Nothing. But that didn't make me feel any better, because as I stood in the center of the room, trying to steady my breathing, I heard the soft click of the door behind me. It was closing, very slowly. I turned around, and for a moment I couldn't move. The door wasn't just closing. Something was pulling it. I couldn't see anything in the darkness around the edges, but the way that door inched shut felt intentional, controlled, like someone was holding the handle from the outside. I forced myself forward and grabbed the door before it shut completely. The second my hand touched the metal, a coldness shot through my arm, so sharp it made me gasp. I yanked the door open and stumbled back into the hallway. The hall should have looked exactly the same as before. Bright, empty, quiet, but something felt off. The lights flickered again, and this time they didn't come back to full brightness. It was dimmer, wrong somehow, like the building had shifted while I wasn't looking. Then I noticed it. Footprints, wet, faint, leading away from the room. Bare footprints, not mine, not from any patient I knew of. They stretched down the hall, turning toward the old wing that had been closed for years. And even worse than that was the sound that followed. Soft breathing, right behind me. I didn't turn around at first. I couldn't. My whole body locked up like my mind needed a second to catch up with what my ears were hearing. The breathing was so close, it felt like it was brushing against my neck, slow and uneven, like whoever it belonged to hadn't drawn air in a very long time. My chest tightened. I finally forced myself to pivot just enough to look over my shoulder. No one was there. The hallway behind me was empty, but the air still felt disturbed, as if someone had just moved through it. The lights flickered again, this time longer, almost like they were struggling. When they brightened slightly, I saw the footprints again. More of them, fresh, still wet, stretching farther into the old wing. Something in me said follow. Something smarter in me said run. But I don't know why I did what I did. Curiosity, fear, instinct, it all pushed me forward, step by trembling step. As I followed the trail, the hospital grew quieter, too quiet. No machines beeping, no carts rolling. Even the hum of the fluorescent lights faded until I could hear only my own breathing. And underneath it, faint but steady, was another breath keeping pace with mine. When I reached the entrance to the old wing, the air changed again, colder, heavier, carrying a faint smell like damp concrete and something metallic. The double doors were slightly open, just enough for me to slip through. Inside, everything felt abandoned. Dusty counters, sheets thrown over old equipment, a wheelchair facing the corner as if someone left it that way on purpose. My footsteps were soft but echoing, bouncing back at me in a way that made the space feel larger than it should have been. Then I saw the last footprint. It stopped right in front of a room with no number. The door was cracked open, the darkness inside thick like fog. I should have turned around. I know that. But I stepped closer, raising my hand to push the door open. Before I could touch it, something pushed back from the other side. Not hard, just enough to let me know someone or something was standing inches away. The breathing stopped, all at once. Then a whisper slid through the crack in the door, so close it felt like it was inside my ear. You came back. I ran. I didn't look behind me. I didn't stop until I was outside in the freezing night air. But sometimes, when I'm alone, I still hear that breath behind me, like it's waiting. I'll never forget the night the hospital felt like it was breathing around me. It wasn't a dramatic moment or anything. It started quietly, the kind of quiet that makes you look over your shoulder even when you know no one's there. This happened a while back when I was helping cover an overnight shift in a part of the building I'd never worked in before. A temporary wing, they called it, though it didn't feel temporary. It felt abandoned. The hallway lights flickered as soon as I stepped in, not the usual hum and buzz of old bulbs trying to stay alive, but a slow dimming, like something was passing in front of them. The air smelled like dust and antiseptic, with a faint sourness that reminded me of wet bandages. My footsteps echoed strangely, too loud and too hollow, as if the floor beneath me was empty. I tried to shake it off. Long night shifts mess with your head, especially when you're alone. But the longer I walked down the hall, the more certain I became that I wasn't the only one moving. I kept hearing this soft shuffle behind me, just out of sync with my own steps. Every time I stopped, it stopped. And when I took another step, it followed. By the time I reached the last room on the right, my heartbeat had already picked up. I could feel it pulsing in my throat, tight and uncomfortable. The door to the room was cracked open, even though all doors in this wing were supposed to stay shut. The darkness inside seemed too thick for a room that should have had at least a monitor or two running. I leaned in slowly, listening first. Nothing, just the faint hum of the building. Then, From somewhere inside that darkness, I heard a soft exhale, not a sigh, not a machine. A breath, a long, slow breath, like someone waking up in a quiet room. My mouth went dry instantly. The air felt heavier, colder. I backed away without taking my eyes off the door. And just as I reached the center of the hallway, the door creaked open a little wider, like someone was watching me leave. I don't know why I didn't run right then. Maybe I didn't want to admit how scared I was. Maybe I thought it was just a patient who wasn't supposed to be there. But as I stood in that dim hallway, staring at the dark room, I felt something shift in the air. The temperature dropped, enough for goosebumps to rise along my arms. I could see my breath faintly when I exhaled, and that shouldn't happen inside a heated building. I took a cautious step forward, intending to close the door and report it. But before I could reach it, something inside moved. Just a tiny sound, like fabric brushing against fabric. My pulse spiked. I stopped mid-step and listened so hard my ears hurt. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, dragging, coming toward the doorway from deep inside the room. I backed away again, trying to keep my breathing quiet, but my chest felt too tight. Every inhale was shallow and shaky. The footsteps grew louder, then stopped right at the threshold. I couldn't see anything, just a pitch-black shape behind the doorframe, darker than the shadows around it. I whispered hello, barely audible, stupidly hoping someone might answer. Something did. A whisper came from the room, but it didn't sound like a voice. It was more like the sound of air moving through teeth, a dry, rasping murmur that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I couldn't make out words, but the tone was unmistakably directed at me. I stepped back until I reached the wall behind me. The lights above flickered twice, then dimmed so low the hallway looked almost sepia. That's when I noticed something on the floor, a handprint, not a fresh one, an old, dusty print smeared across the tiles near the base of the wall, and right beside it, another one, smaller, then more, trailing down the hall like someone had crawled through here long before the wing was closed. My throat tightened. I pushed myself away from the wall and turned toward the exit at the far end of the hall. That's when I heard the breathing again, right behind me, closer than before. Slow, damp, uneven, like someone standing inches away. I didn't want to look back. I forced myself to keep walking without turning around. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but somehow moving slowly felt safer, like sudden movement would draw attention to me. The hallway felt longer than before, stretching out in front of me like a tunnel. My footsteps made soft taps on the floor, but beneath them I could still hear that breathing. Close, too close. It followed with an unbroken rhythm that didn't match mine. By the time I reached the halfway point, I couldn't pretend anymore. I wasn't alone. Something was behind me, watching, matching my pace, and the longer I ignored it, the louder that breathing grew, rougher, like whoever it belonged to was struggling. I finally turned my head just enough to see the floor behind me in my peripheral vision. That's when I saw the footprints, not shoe prints, bare footprints, wet and smeared, as if someone had stepped through water or blood. They appeared one by one on the tiles behind me, forming as though an invisible person was walking there. I watched one print sink onto the floor, flattening as weight pressed into it. But there was nothing above it. No body, no shadow. My mind blanked with panic. I stumbled forward, almost tripping, and the moment I sped up, the breathing behind me grew faster too, like it was excited. I burst into a shaky half-run, heading straight for the double doors leading out of the wing. My heartbeat hammered against my ribs, loud enough to drown out everything else. But I swear I could still hear footsteps, those wet, dragging ones, right behind me, gaining ground. I slammed into the doors and shoved them open. Cold air from the main hallway rushed in, normal light, normal sound. Everything felt real again, safe. When I turned around, the doors were swinging back slowly, creaking on their hinges. I held my breath, watching the shadows inside the old wing. Nothing came out, but something changed in the reflection on the glass. Behind my reflection, in the dark gap between the doors, I saw a shape, a tall, thin silhouette with its head tilted slightly, as if curious. Its outline flickered like smoke, but the eyes, if they were eyes, glowed faintly, like dying embers. When I blinked, the shape was gone, but for days after, I kept finding wet footprints near the wing entrance. And sometimes, late at night, I still hear that breathing. I still don't understand what happened that night. And honestly, part of me wishes I never went in there at all. It was supposed to be a simple errand. I was visiting my uncle in the hospital after work, and I dropped my phone somewhere between the elevators and the vending machines. By the time I realized it, the floor had already quieted down. Visiting hours were over. The halls had that strange, empty feeling, like the building was holding its breath. I retraced my steps down the corridor, counting each echo of my footsteps. The lights flickered every few seconds, like they were struggling to stay awake too. There was something unnerving about the way the shadows moved along the walls, stretching and shifting with each flicker. When I reached the vending area, my phone wasn't there. I checked under the chairs, behind the machine, even under the cart of cleaning supplies left in the corner. Nothing. That's when I heard a soft thud from the hallway I just walked through. It didn't sound like something falling, more like someone taking a slow step. I froze, listening. My heartbeat felt loud enough to echo. Another step. Soft, careful. I turned around, but the hallway was empty, completely still. The kind of stillness that tells you something was there a second ago, but moved just out of sight. I told myself it was a nurse or staff member, but there weren't any voices or carts rolling or keys jangling. Just silence so deep it felt unnatural. As I walked back toward my uncle's room, the air got colder. The chill wasn't from the AC either. It felt damp, almost icy, like I'd stepped into a basement. My breathing grew uneven without me noticing. I kept glancing behind me, expecting to see someone. When I reached the intersection of two hallways, I saw something on the floor ahead. A faint glow. My phone, but it was lying in front of the entrance to Ward C, a ward that had been shut down months ago. And as I reached for it, I heard something from behind the closed doors inside the dark ward. A slow, deliberate inhale. For a moment, I just stood there staring at the door to Ward C, my hand hovering above my phone but not touching it. That inhale sounded too close, like someone was standing just a few feet behind the door, listening. The kind of breath that didn't belong to someone sleeping or resting. It was heavier, strained, like pulling air through something damaged. I finally crouched down and grabbed my phone, but the moment my fingers closed around it, the breathing stopped. The sudden silence felt worse. My chest tightened, my heartbeat thudding so hard it made my vision pulse. I backed away slowly, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. Just as I turned to leave, the door creaked, barely. Not a full opening, just enough for a sliver of darkness to leak out. The gap was thin, but somehow it looked deeper than it should. Like the room inside wasn't just unlit, but hollow, as if the darkness had weight to it. I took a shaky step back and forced myself to keep my eyes on the gap. The lights in the hallway flickered again, dimming long enough for the shadows to stretch toward me, across the floor. I swear I saw one of them move independently, curling like fingers. Then I heard it. Footsteps, not from behind the door, from behind me, light at first, almost hesitant, as if whoever or whatever was walking didn't want to be noticed. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't turn around. Couldn't. All I could do was listen to the steps grow clearer, slow, bare, the soft slap of skin against tile. My palms started sweating. My throat felt dry. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs felt like they'd been filled with cold sand. The footsteps stopped directly behind me, close enough that I should have been able to feel someone's presence. But there was nothing. No warmth, no shadow, no movement. Then something brushed my shoulder. Not a hand, not quite. More like a cold draft with weight to it. A pressure that slid across my skin and stopped at my neck. Every hair on my body stood on end. I swallowed hard, my breath shaking. That's when the door to Ward C swung open on its own. Slow, silent, inviting. I didn't run. I don't know why. Maybe my legs were frozen, or maybe some part of me needed to see if what I heard was real. So I took one step back toward the elevator, my breath shaking in my chest. The hallway felt even longer now, like it was stretching while I looked at it. The lights above me buzzed softly, then dimmed again, then flickered like they were struggling to stay alive. The elevator doors were still open. No sound, no movement, just that faint metallic smell drifting from inside. I leaned in slowly, keeping one hand on the wall in case I needed to push myself away. The moment my head passed the doorway, I heard it again. Not breathing this time, not movement. It was a whisper, so close that it felt like it touched the inside of my ear. I couldn't understand the words. It was low, broken, like someone speaking through water. but the intention felt human, or something pretending to be. I stumbled back, heart racing so fast it made my vision blur. I looked down the hallway toward the nurse's station. Empty. I looked back toward the emergency exit. Dark. The whole hospital felt abandoned now, like it had swallowed its own staff. Then the elevator doors closed by themselves. No one had pressed the button. No one was inside. At least no one I could see. The floor display lit up. It started going down. Slowly, one floor at a time. Before it reached the bottom, the doors opened again. Not on a floor, on the hallway right in front of me, as if it had reset itself just to face me. A cold air rolled out like something exhaling, a long, steady breath that wasn't mine. My instincts finally kicked in. I backed away, then turned, then walked as fast as I could toward the stairwell. I didn't look behind me, not even once. I could hear the elevator moving again, doors sliding open somewhere near me, then closing, then opening again, like it was following. By the time I burst out of the hospital's front entrance, I was shaking so hard I couldn't use my phone for a full minute. And the worst part is this. A week later, when I went back to get my paperwork, the receptionist told me something I can't get out of my head. That elevator I used, the East Wing one, it's been out of service for months. I didn't plan to tell anyone about this, mostly because I still can't explain what I saw, or what I heard, or what followed me out of that building. But every time I close my eyes, I'm back in that corridor, listening to a sound that I know no living person could make. So maybe sharing it will help me sleep again. It happened 2 years ago, when I was staying overnight at the hospital after my younger cousin had surgery. Nothing major, just something that required monitoring. Around midnight, the nurse suggested I go stretch my legs or get a drink, because visiting hours were over and my cousin was asleep. I wasn't tired yet, so I decided to walk the halls a bit. The fourth floor, the one we were on, was quiet in a way that didn't feel peaceful. It felt hollow. Every step I took echoed too loudly, like the building was empty. The lights flickered every few seconds, not enough to be alarming, just enough to make me uneasy. There was this faint hum in the walls, like machinery struggling to stay on. As I turned the corner near the old storage rooms, I heard something that made my skin crawl. Footsteps. Slow, not dragging, but uneven, like someone trying to walk after, forgetting how. They weren't coming from behind me or in front of me. They were coming from the ceiling, right above me. One step, then another, spaced too far apart to be a normal stride. I froze, staring up at the stained ceiling tiles. My heartbeat felt like it was stuck in my throat. For a moment, I told myself it was pipes expanding or something mechanical. But then the footsteps stopped directly above me, and I swear I felt a faint vibration in the floor, like whatever was up there had pressed its weight down. The hallway suddenly felt colder, not gradually, but all at once. My breath started to fog slightly each time I exhaled. I wrapped my arms around myself and tried to walk away, slow and steady, trying not to make any sound. But after only a few steps, I heard it again. This time it wasn't footsteps. It was breathing, heavy, wet, and just barely above my head. I don't know how long I stood there, listening to that sound dripping through the ceiling. Every breath it took felt too deliberate, too slow, like whoever it belonged to was leaning in, trying to match my own breathing pattern. I could feel my chest tightening as I instinctively tried to breathe quieter, softer, hoping whatever it was wouldn't notice me. Then the breathing stopped. The silence that followed was worse. It was so sudden, it made my ears ring. I backed away from the spot, keeping my eyes on the ceiling. I must have taken 5 steps before I heard a soft click behind me, like a door gently unlatching. When I turned, the storage room door at the end of the hall was cracked open. I was sure it had been closed when I walked past earlier. A dim light flickered inside, just enough to outline shelves covered with sheets and old medical equipment. I don't know what possessed me to look inside. Maybe fear, maybe curiosity. But I pushed the door slowly, letting it swing wider without stepping in. The smell hit me first. Damp, dusty, with something faintly metallic underneath. My eyes adjusted, and I noticed that some of the sheets covering the equipment had been pulled to the floor, as if something had crawled out from under them. The air felt wrong, thicker than the hallway, and somewhere deep inside the room, I heard a soft whimper. Not a cry, a whimper. like someone trying desperately not to be heard. I whispered, asking if someone was in there, if they needed help. No answer. Just the faint shuffle of movement behind one of the tall shelves. My heartbeat sped up until I felt it in my wrists. I knew I should have walked away. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to go back to my cousin's room, shut the door, and wait until morning. But then the lights in the hallway behind me flickered again, plunging everything into near darkness for half a second. And in that moment, I saw a shape move in the storage room. Tall, too tall, folding itself behind the shelf like it had no bones. The light steadied. The room went silent again. And then, from deep inside the dark, a voice whispered my name. Not yelled, not called. Whispered, like it was inches from my ear. I froze, every muscle in my body locked up so fast it hurt. Hearing my name in that whisper felt like someone had poured ice water straight down my spine. It wasn't the voice of anyone I knew. It wasn't even the kind of whisper a human makes. It was too thin, too stretched, like words forced through teeth that didn't fit together. I stumbled backward until my shoulder hit the hallway wall. I kept my eyes on the open door, waiting for something to step out, but nothing moved. The storage room stayed still, quiet, almost innocent if you didn't know what was inside. I told myself I was imagining things, that exhaustion was playing tricks on me, but my body didn't believe a word of it. My breathing was fast and shallow, and my hands were shaking so badly I had to clench them into fists. I whispered again, asking who was there. This time, the reply wasn't a voice. It was a slow, dragging sound, like fingernails scraping across the floor. It started deep inside the room and moved forward, stopping just at the edge of the light. I didn't see anything, but I knew something was there, waiting, listening. I backed away again, step by step, not daring to turn my back. The hall felt too long, every shadow too deep. When I finally reached the nurse's station at the end of the corridor, I found it empty. No staff, no sounds, just the low hum of machines behind closed doors. It did make sense. This floor shouldn't have been that quiet. I looked back. The storage room door was now wide open, not cracked, not halfway, wide, like something had pushed it all the way, with purpose. For a moment, nothing happened. And then the lights in the hall flickered again, once, twice, before going completely still. And in the dark space between two ceiling lamps, I saw it. A face, or something pretending to be a face. Too long, too narrow, no eyes. Just the impression of features stretched across a shape that didn't seem built for them. It didn't move. It didn't speak. It just leaned slightly out of the doorway, like it was studying me. I didn't wait to see what it wanted. I ran. I didn't stop until I was at my cousin's room, slamming the door shut and pushing a chair against it. I sat there, listening, heart pounding so hard it made me dizzy. Nothing followed. Nothing touched the door. But just before dawn, when the first nurse finally walked by, I heard something from the hallway. 3 slow taps on the floor, right outside the door, like someone knocking, patiently, waiting. I still don't understand what I saw that night, and honestly, I'm not sure I ever want to. It happened when I was staying at the old regional hospital, the one they shut down a year later. I was there to watch over my aunt, who had just come out of surgery. It was supposed to be a quiet night, just me, a half-asleep patient, and a hallway that always felt colder than the rest of the building for no clear reason. The strangeness started around 2 a.m. I remember checking my phone, realizing the signal had dropped again, and setting it aside with this heavy feeling in my chest. The lights in the hallway outside were dimmed for the night shift, so every sound felt sharper. Every footstep echoed just a bit longer than it should have. I kept telling myself it was just a big, empty building. But then I heard breathing. Soft, slow breathing, like someone was standing right behind the door. At first I thought it was a nurse passing by, but it didn't fade or shift. It stayed, steady and uncomfortably close, almost like it was waiting for something. I walked to the door and peeked into the hallway. Nothing. Just the flickering exit sign at the far end and that weird, humming air conditioner. Still, the breathing didn't go away. It took me a few seconds to realize it wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from the ceiling vent right above my aunt's bed. My heartbeat kicked hard, that deep pounding you feel in your throat. I stepped closer, listening. The breathing stopped the second I moved. completely silent like it had been shut off. I wanted to pretend I imagined it, but then the ceiling vent made a soft, metallic click, like something shifting inside it. I backed away slowly. The room felt colder. Even the shadows under the bed looked darker than before. I kept telling myself to calm down, that old hospitals make weird noises, but the hairs on my arms wouldn't settle. Something about that night felt wrong from the beginning. I just didn't realize how wrong until I stepped back into the hallway. The hallway felt different the moment I stepped out, like the air had thickened. The lights overhead were buzzing quietly, and every few seconds one of them flickered just enough to make my vision stutter. I tried to shake off the feeling, but my nerves were already tight. I told myself I just needed a quick walk, something to clear my head. But as soon as I took a few steps, I heard it again. Footsteps, not loud ones. Soft, slow, uneven, almost like someone was dragging one foot slightly behind the other. I froze and listened. The sound was coming from around the corner, moving in my direction. I looked back at my aunt's door, thinking about going inside, but curiosity kept me rooted. I thought maybe it was a nurse, or maybe another visitor who couldn't sleep. Anything normal, anything human. But then the footsteps stopped, and whatever had been walking started whispering. I couldn't make out words, just this faint, breathy murmur that slipped along the walls. It felt wrong instantly. Too close, too low, too deliberate. My chest tightened, and I realized I was holding my breath. When I finally exhaled, the whispering stopped, as if it heard me. I forced myself to move back toward the room. Every step felt like pushing through cold water. When I reached the door and grabbed the handle, the lights behind me went out for half a second, just long enough for me to hear something right at my back. A single, shaky inhale. Not mine. I lunged into the room, shut the door, and pressed my back against it. My heart was pounding so hard, I could feel the vibration in my teeth. The room was quiet except for the beeping of my aunt's monitor, but even that suddenly sounded too slow, too spaced out. When I looked at her, she was still asleep, but her face seemed unnaturally pale, like the color had drained from her in the few minutes I'd been gone. Then something tapped from the hallway side of the door. Soft, rhythmic, like knuckles testing the wood. I didn't move. I didn't speak. And the tapping continued, steady, patient, as if whatever was out there knew I had nowhere else to go. The tapping stopped as suddenly as it started, but that didn't make the room feel any safer. The silence that followed was heavier, almost oppressive, like the walls were holding their breath with me. I didn't dare look at the door again. Instead, I focused on my aunt's monitor. The soft beeping had always been reassuring, but now each tone felt stretched, slowed, like the machine itself was hesitating. Then the room temperature dropped even lower. Not a normal hospital chill. This felt like stepping into a freezer. My breath puffed out in faint white clouds. I wrapped my arms around myself and took a shaky step closer to the bed. That was when I heard it. A faint scraping sound coming from the vent again. This time, I didn't get closer. I stayed perfectly still, listening. Something inside was moving, dragging against metal. The sound traveled the length of the vent, slow and deliberate. I felt every muscle in my back tighten. I kept waiting for it to stop, or for something to reveal itself, but it just kept scraping, like it was crawling through the ducts. And then my aunt exhaled sharply and whispered my name. I nearly jumped out of my skin. She'd been asleep the entire time. I turned to her, relieved and terrified, all at once. Her eyes were still closed, but her lips were parted, trembling like she was trying to speak again. I leaned over her, whispering that I was there, that everything was fine. But before I could finish the sentence, her eyes shot open. They weren't looking at me. They were fixed on the vent above her bed. Wide, terrified, unblinking. Her hand gripped my wrist with a strength she didn't have before the surgery. She wasn't looking at me at all. She was looking at something behind me. I didn't want to turn around. Every instinct screamed not to, but slowly, because I had to. I looked over my shoulder. The room was empty. Nothing was there, just shadows and that flickering hallway light bleeding under the door. But my aunt's grip didn't loosen. She whispered one more thing, her voice barely audible. "It came in with you." I didn't stay for sunrise, and even now, months later, I still hear the breathing sometimes when I'm alone. I never went back to that hospital, but sometimes I swear something from that night still follows me from room to room.